Good morning. This is the very last video. I think I mistakenly said that video 7 was the last, but this is the very last, and it will be much shorter. We're going to talk about the limits of Beccaria's theory, deterrence theory. And there are just three we're going to discuss. These are not the only ones, but we're going to discuss these limits. The first one, the idea of repeat offenders. Because according to Beccaria, punishment for a particular crime should always be the same, regardless of how many times a person has committed that crime. Well, obviously, if someone has committed that crime 20 times, then they're in a different place than someone who has committed that crime one time. That first-time offender may be deterred by something much less in the way of punishment than what this other person who has committed the crime 20 times. So that's important to understand. For Beccaria, there was no difference in people like this. But now I'm not saying that he didn't think that in his mind, but he didn't write that in his works. Varying thought processes. That leads us to why people are different. We all have different thought processes. We think differently. Under the Enlightenment, the idea was we're all going to think the same because logic is logic. So we'll all come to, if we're using logic, we'll all come to the same conclusion. We all will. We just all will because of logic. Well, in the first place, not everyone thinks logically. There are plenty of logical fallacies out there. There's the old adage, the first rule is don't fool yourself, but you're the easiest one to fool, right? Emotions get in the way. There are all sorts of other things other than our rationality that affect our thought processes. So remember, our rationality is rational thought, but we might be thinking irrationally. So that's a limit of Beccaria, which leads to the fact that different people have different values, meaning principles that they live by, and they value different things, meaning that there are different types of things that they value. So, I might have a value that it is wrong to cheat anyone, even out of a penny. Other people may have a different value as far as that goes. So they might choose differently. So if we design punishments that are just so specific and consistent and exactly the same, we might not be truly deterring folks. Now, I will tell you, one of my favorite TV shows of all times was the original Wonder Years series. And the reason is because the character of Kevin, because of the time it was set, would be just a few years older than me. So it reminded me of my own childhood to watch that show. But there was one episode where Kevin had been struggling in math, and he was in middle school. He'd been struggling in math, and he finally started getting his grades up, and then all of a sudden they started dropping again. And he found out that because his teacher is grading on the curve, that when some of his fellow students were cheating, so they started getting better grades, his grades started to drop. Well, he eventually joins in on the cheating. They give him the opportunity to join in. And at first he says no, but then he eventually does join in. When he starts making really good grades, his math teacher says, "Wow, Kevin, you've come such a long way. I want to transfer you to my advanced math class." So he gets in the advanced math class and he's just completely lost. Well, by the end of the episode, the other students got caught cheating, not by getting caught cheating, but by the teacher, Mr. Collins, doing a test in a different way so they couldn't cheat. And it just completely blew their grades down. So Kevin decides he's got to get out of that advanced math class, and he goes into his teacher and he's about to confess to Mr. Collins that he has cheated. And Mr. Collins looks up at him and says, "Had enough?" And he said, "But I don't understand." And he said, in pointing out that how the other students had been treated. And Mr. Collins says to Kevin, "Every problem contains its own solution." In other words, Mr. Collins knew what Beccaria did not know. Mr. Collins knew that Kevin would be deterred one way and those other students would be deterred a different way. That is really the heart of the limit of Beccaria's um, theory, is that he fails to recognize the differences amongst individuals in the way that they think. So I hope that you've learned a little bit about deterrence theory, because this forms the basis of our criminal justice system. When we look at a lot of the other theories that we're going to be looking at, we develop some policies, we develop programs, but we really don't develop our criminal justice sentencing schemes based on anything other than deterrence theory here in the US. Very important to understand that. So we will move on to the early biological theories for our next unit, and we will see you next video.